So I'm very excited to introduce our next presenter who joins us from Wilson, Perumal and Company. Wilson Perumal is a leading management consulting firm with a strong track record for delivering fast results in manufacturing and industrial environments. Today's speaker has deep expertise in human and organizational performance. He has designed and led numerous organizational transformations, merging the foundations of high reliability organizations and the principles of human performance. He has created and led high-performing teams in manufacturing, industrial, aviation, technology, and government environments. Today, he will be presenting on human and organizational performance, your key to unlocking sustainable, industry-leading performance in a complex environment. Please welcome to the stage with a warm round of applause, Ernie Spence from Wilson, Perumal and Company.
Thank you. All right, good afternoon, everybody. Thanks for attending this session. We're going to talk about human and organizational performance and how it really is the key to cutting through the complexity we have in our business, merging your culture with your operations to achieve and sustain industry-leading performance. So as we start off, I want to focus just on a couple of different ways that you could, or a couple of different organizations that have existed that I've been a part of. The first I'll call the worst of times. When we think about the worst of times, this organization was suffering from significant safety and operational issues. And when I say significant, I mean they were having multiple safety and injury incidents per month. Some of them were life-disabling. We were focused about an $8.5 billion capital plant, and 99% of the equipment in that facility was not safe to operate. We averaged 10.5 safety critical discrepancies per item or per piece of equipment. Some of them had dozens and dozens of safety critical discrepancies, yet they were still in use, which was a big contributor to these incidents and the accidents that were happening throughout the facility. We were having a number of personnel incidents per month, a lot of HR issues. We were also having, from a production perspective, we had a 38-week program we were attempting to execute. It was taking over 100 weeks to get through the system, and we were over a year behind on deliveries. Asset divestiture management was well off track. Maintenance expenses were well over budget, and audits of maintenance programs were failing at a rate of about 40%. The other organization is almost the mirror image of that. Very, very low safety rates, trending down, minor incidences at worst when they did happen. You had near perfect asset availability that you could hope for. You had on-time delivery, production. You had an engaged workforce that was doing their part to support each other in how they were working together. The personnel incidences just simply did not exist in this organization. Management of the assets was as you would expect. Maintenance costs were below budget, and the production line was running as it should have been. The only difference between these two organizations was 24 months and a dedicated focus that I put on human and organizational performance. So we went from what I would say is easily worst in class, a dangerous, hazardous environment to work in, to world-class, world-leading level performance that was sustained going forward. That was the 24-month transformation that it took. We saw a complete turnaround within 9 months from where we started, and the sustainment piece took about 12 to 15 months to get going once we were actually started achieving the results. So let's talk about how we did that. Because you think about how an organization could be in one place or the other, there are two main pieces that I want to make sure that we center on. The first is complexity. And complexity is the defining issue that is facing organizations today. Andy Beal has said complexity dramatically increases our cost and risk of failure. We think about the businesses we run today and the operations that you're responsible for. I think you probably would agree with this recent survey of global CEOs that says complexity is the primary issue that they face in their business today. and we think about how complexity affects us. Really, what is it? It's a lot of different things, but you can think of it simply as the number of things that are involved in the work that you do. Decisions, process steps, interactions between various portions of things that are happening through a production line, or people that are interacting. And the very insidious part of complexity is that as the number of interactions go up, the complexity in the system increases exponentially. If we've got 10 connections there are 10 points to connect, there's 45 possible interactions between them. When we get to 100, there's over 5,000 possible links. And the thing about complexity in our operations is that as you add complexity, you add opportunities for error, which means that risk increases exponentially as complexity adds in as well. And that's a very, very difficult problem to manage in the world in which we're operating today. How do we manage it? Well, I would say our natural response is, as we add complexity into the system, it tends to lead to poor execution, which tends to lead us to lose control of our processes, which then causes below standard or below expectation business performance. And so what do? Well, we add in more people, we add in more controls, we add in more ways of trying to better manage the business, which in effect just adds more complexity to the problem we're trying to solve. And so we call this the vicious complexity cycle. And this is what we are dealing with, and it's getting worse day in and day out. Just think about all the problems that you have to manage. Something does not go as it intended. What do? We put a control directly on that point, right? That's an increment of complexity that has perhaps a very local value, but it weighs down the entire system and your ability to manage it from the senior level. Now, the other one I want to anchor us on is culture. More than anything else, culture defines how work gets done. And we can think of a lot of ways to describe culture. The model we have up here we call the onion model. At the core of that onion model are your values. And there are other parts of that go along to define your culture, things like our rituals, our heroes, our symbols, but what cuts across all of it? And if you really want to see the culture in an organization, just walk in and look at how they get work done. How do they work? What are those practices? The practices are the things that we can see very, very overtly, and that's how we define and describe most accurately describe the culture in any organization. Your culture is not immune to the effects of complexity, but it can help you cut through it. It can also be seriously degraded by the effects of complexity. So, now, why do we fail to get done what we had intended? Some reasons that I can think of would include, well, maybe a procedure wasn't followed, or the material that we needed wasn't available, the schedule was not realistic, or something broke that was unplanned. There's lots of other reasons. It could even be that somebody did something that they weren't supposed to do or weren't qualified to do. These are the sort of issues that we deal with at a very tactical level day in and day out in our business, right? So when that happens, well, we do the good management thing and we try to address those failures, and we do it by typically answering a few questions. So let's think first, hey, a procedure failed, so it was not followed. We have to ask the question, well, why was it not followed? Well, it could have been because the person who was supposed to execute it didn't follow it, and maybe they didn't know how, they didn't know that they were supposed to, maybe they just simply chose not to, in which case we're going to probably try to fix the human that was involved with that. But maybe it wasn't the human's problem, maybe it was the procedure, maybe it was wrong, maybe the system had outlived or outgrew the procedure. And maybe we should think about trying to fix back to the procedure. Or oftentimes what we do is we say, well, we're just still going to blame the human that's part of that, right? In the end, no matter what path we take, what we're really trying to do is we're trying to eliminate the possibility of that error happening again. Now, I have audience participation required for this pop quiz. I'll start the sentence. I'd like you to finish it. So to err is human. Nobody is perfect. Everyone makes. All right. So A plus, we all know this. Yet, as we're thinking about trying to manage our business, what we focus on is we strive to eliminate the opportunity for people to make mistakes. But we know that they're going to make them. So when we think about how this ties into human and organizational performance, it really starts to eliminate a different way of thinking about running our business. So a traditional approach is that we train our employees. In the H&OP environment, we'll train them, but we're also going to focus on learning and improvement. We're going to, as managers in a traditional environment, we're going to give direction and we're going to hold people accountable. In that H&OP environment, we're going to be focused on tying together leaders and employees as collaborators and partners to get the work done right the first time around. We think about trying to eliminate those opportunities for errors and mistakes. In an HOP environment, we realize that people are going to make mistakes, and we need to build resilience into our operations so that when a mistakes happen, it's not catastrophic. It can be recovered. That defect can be corrected before the part would leave the line and end up being a reject. We don't want to design such frailty into the system that a single human mistake which is going to be made is going to lead to an unrecoverable error. In a traditional approach, you manage risks. In the HOP environment, instead of managing risks, we manage the sources of risks. The number of risks that we face in our operations today are nearly infinite. And we go about doing things like risk registers and analyses and putting controls and mitigations in on those risks. But if you really get down to it, they're a very, very finite number of sources of risk. In fact, there's only 4 of them. And if we, instead of trying to manage an infinite number of risks, but instead manage to those 4 sources of risks, now it provides you as a manager, as a leader over that environment, a tremendous point of leverage to mitigate those risks before you're trying to just put out fires everywhere. The other thing that in the traditional environment is, in the end, I think we probably all recognize that mistakes are going to get made and we're just going to have to deal with them. In that H&OP environment, it's a different mindset. It's a belief that achieving and sustaining that industry-leading environment, industry-leading performance in the face of complexity, in the face of all the uncertainty that we deal with on a day in and day out, is actually achievable, and so therefore the pieces are put in place to do so. So what's required? Well, as we think about what we get out of H&OP, it really is focused on getting back to addressing those issues of complexity and doing it with our culture and the operational pieces merged together, but not looking at them singularly. So the companies that are successful in this space, what they do is they recognize that these are truths and they embed them into their operations. So they recognize it is not possible to know or predict all the ways that mistakes or failures can be made. They recognize that building systems that require perfection in operations will break, and so therefore they instead focus on building resiliency. They also recognize that those who are doing the work oftentimes have a much, much better understanding of how it's going than the people who are managing the work. Think about how detached we are from what's really happening down at the point of work, right? And the information and the knowledge that exists within those frontline individuals and how powerful that is. The H&OP focused companies are going to tap that and use that on a day in and day out basis. They also recognize that precursors to catastrophic failure are oftentimes extremely, extremely weak signals in a very, very noisy environment. But if you look at all of the major catastrophic industrial incidents that have happened in recent history, you go back and you look at it, it's I would say, embarrassingly obvious, the mistakes that were being made, it's apparent that if somebody would have just seen it, oh, but wait, almost always multiple people did see it, and that signal, that information was not getting put forth and processed in the way that it needed to be. So it's there. The H&OP companies or organizations are focused on extracting that and installing ways to understand that. And part of the way they do that is through recognition that high quality, high frequency feedback from the bowels, the depths of the organization is absolutely required to do it. So there are 5 principles that are tied to human performance. This comes from a writing by Todd Complin called the 5 Principles of Human Performance. And in most environments, this writing is really kind of focused on safety performance. And I think it's very, very instructive, and we use it kind of as a basis to understand what's the human aspect of it. And I think it's really hard to deny that these are the truths. You know, people make mistakes, error is normal, blame, in the end, fixes nothing. Learning and understanding and improving is absolutely vital, and it must be done deliberately. Our context in which we operate, the environment in which we work, and we've heard this from several speakers over the course of the last 2 days, the system in which people work matters. It influences how they make decisions. It influences the actions that they're going to take. So that context of the environment in which we're working is absolutely critical. And also, how leadership, how you respond to failure absolutely matters. So that's the human piece of it. But how do we tie it into the organizational side? To really get after human and organizational performance, what we have to do is we have to embed that into our organizations and the way that we work and the way that they operate. And that really happens on 4 different facets. One is our operating model, which is how we're structured. The other is our organizational culture, our management systems, and leadership. I've heard a number of speakers talking over the last 2 days and in conversations we've had with folks. The pieces that I think folks are most interested in right now are what I'm going to focus on for the next couple of slides, which is the organizational culture, the management systems, and the leadership aspect of it. When you bring these 5 facets together, the human side, the organizational side, and they actually start to work together, they're being sustained and continuously improved, that's where you start building resiliency into your operations. That's where you can accept the fact that people are going to make mistakes day in and day out, but the system is not going to be so fragile that any one of those mistakes is going to cause a catastrophic failure or breakdown. So let's start first on talking about the organizational culture side. All high-performing organizations share very similar traits in their culture. They may call them different things, they may use different words to describe them, but at their core, if you listen to folks who are leaders or members of high-performing organizations, they will describe their operational culture using words that sound like integrity, formality, team backup, having a questioning attitude, and the special part of all of that together is that it's not just a focus on team backup or professional knowledge or integrity. It's about how those operational tenets work together. In the end, almost all of those have both positive and negative expressions that you can imagine. Think about questioning attitude. If you ask me to do something, a negative expression would be, well, who made you my boss, right? But a very positive expression of questioning attitude is, well, when I turn this valve, I expect to see this happen in the system. And I have enough knowledge to know that that's going to happen, and I have enough knowledge and the ability to actually check, and enough formality to make sure that I actually do check that I get the expected result when I flip that switch or turn that valve. And that's when these operational tenets are starting to work together, and they accentuate the positive expressions of these, and they dampen out the potential negative things that could be coming from the way that folks might interpret them. The reality is very, very different in most organizations. And the chart you see here on the right side of the screen reflects that. This is data, this is analysis from a client that we have applied this tool that we call Yardstick. It's an ability to measure your culture on 40 different dimensions, compare it to high-performing organizations and others in your industry, and it tells you how different levels or different portions of the organization think about and understand their culture. And what we see here is that if the red dots represent the ideal world where we're trying to drive to, you can see that amongst the senior leaders, they think that they're pretty close. But when you get down to the frontline operators, it's a completely different view. And with a tool like this, you can understand that we don't just have a culture in our company. We have different pockets of culture and different ways of seeing it. And almost everybody will experience the culture differently. But in a high-performing organization, that's not the case. They work to put everybody on the same level playing field. Everybody's experiencing the culture in a very, very similar way. And the way they do it, all high-performing organizations are very, very deliberate about their culture. Let's talk about management systems. So we obviously have our value chain processes. That's how we're going to deliver business out to our customers, how we're going to make value for our stakeholders. And across that value chain, you have your management system processes that are applied to those. In our management systems, though, what we oftentimes see is that they're poorly built, they're poorly followed, they might be ad hoc, they might be informal, they might be outdated, they might be redundant. I once led an organization that had 7 different safety management systems, and they were all in conflict with each other. About every 6 weeks, somebody would come up to give me an audit, and then I would hear, "Hey, Ernie, you're doing this wrong. You need to do it this way." And we'd start doing it that way, and about 6 weeks later, somebody else would say up, hey, you're doing that wrong. You're supposed to be doing it the way we were doing it 6 weeks prior. So when you have that level of uncertainty about how folks should actually be managing those processes that are going into executing your value stream, you can see how it degrades performance. When you think about how much value potential exists within your business, that's what your value stream is defined around. How much you actually get depends upon how effective your management systems are. And you oftentimes will see that you can get significantly more value out of your business, not by improving the value stream, not by adding another plant, not by adding another product, or opening up another way to serve the customer, but by just simply executing the value processes, the value chain processes you have today better. And that's where human organizational performance will focus on that. We heard a lot about that from the gentleman from Fender yesterday. Before they automate, they make sure that they're executing what they want to automate as well as they possibly can. And then they get very, very specific about trying to improve the value stream portion. Now, leadership. This is the engine that powers the organizational learning and action. But the reality is, leaders almost never want to hear the truth when that they can hear instead that they are correct. And our greatest enemy to learning is knowing. So leaders in organizations that are successfully employing the principles of human organizational performance, they think about things differently and they do different things. First and foremost, they design and install the systems and tools that are going to allow the organization to give them feedback, and they make them widely available and easy to use at every level of the organization. And then they absolutely crave and are open to that honest feedback. I want to know the truth. I don't want to know how correct I am. And it's a very, very important differentiating message that you see between leaders who are effective in this regard and those who are operating in what might some people will just describe as a little ecosystem of their own, is completely isolated from the reality in which the business is operating. And those leaders also take very prompt action on the feedback that they get, right? And that's where they are able to pick up on these weak signals and address them before they become catastrophic issues within the business. This key question that H&OP leaders ask, what is happening when nothing is happening, is a really, really powerful question. If you think about this, it can be answered on multiple levels, multiple dimensions, and can truly provide you a lot of insight into your business and into your operations and how people are working. If you're willing and you have this mind share to think more deeply, more critically about your business and how people are executing at it. So, how do we pull it all together? At Wilson Perumal, we help companies bring this to life. A typical H&OP transformation will look something like what we have here on the screen. There's going to be a need to plan and prepare, which is really around aligning the team around what's the intent and what's the overall plan. What are we trying to accomplish here with this notion of human and organizational performance? And then you need to get ready, right? You need to understand where the organization is today, where it's strong, where it has alignment, where it doesn't. And we typically will do that through a relatively short, focused assessment on those topics around culture, management system, leadership, your operating model, your structure, looking at how the people are executing in the business today. And then we need to lay out a comprehensive plan, and then we need to take action. Those first 3 blocks can take anywhere from a few weeks to a couple of months, depending upon the size of the organization, the level of understanding and alignment around what it is that at the leadership levels of what wants to be accomplished. And then the execution phase really depends upon, how much change needs to be made, the complexity of your operations, how much focus and energy you're able to put into it. I mentioned the story at the beginning of that organization that I was senior leader of. We went from being a very hazardous, dangerous, low-performing environment to 9 months later, we were getting close back to achieving the performance capabilities that we needed. And then it took us another 12, 15 months to get and reset and have those capabilities being sustainable. The important part, though, is that you cannot just jump straight to the execution piece. You really need to understand how things are today so you can understand what it is that you need to focus your energy on. Choosing that right starting point, though, is absolutely critical. You can take in the matrix we have up here, you can take a very narrow focus. You might start at a single location or a single plant. You might think about starting in a BU or a region, or maybe going company-wide. And that would be the horizontal axis going across the matrix there. Down the vertical axis, you might choose to have a single issue, like say productivity, or scrap, or waste, or safety. Or you might have a topic, like we want to focus on culture, we want to focus on the management system. Or you may look and say, well, we need to look at all of these H&OP elements together. When you start up in the upper left corner, more narrowly scoped, narrowly defined, you're able to get traction, you're able to show results, you're able to build momentum quickly, but it tends to be fairly focused and isolated, right? As you move down to the bottom right corner, you're talking about more transformative change. You're talking about the need to have alignment across the entire team. You're talking about the ability, especially in large organizations, to make a lot of changes at once and have folks involved and understanding at multiple levels, which is harder to manage. I would caution you that you do not want to be down in the right-hand corner starting an H&OP transformation without the absolute commitment of your senior leaders. And when I say committed, I mean they are involved in it on a day-to-day basis. It can't be a priority amongst all of the other priorities if you're going to try to take the approach down to the bottom right-hand corner. Our clients, we typically will see about 60% of them will start with that narrow BU or site focus. About 30% will start focusing on a topic like safety or productivity or cost controls. And then there's that much smaller minority which says, we're going to do this enterprise-wide all from the beginning. Regardless of which way you go, you really do need to think about, though, is there a burning platform, a burning issue that you can tie this to let folks start to see what it is that we're trying to fix, to be able to show results and get going quickly on it. So as we think about bringing this all together, culture drives performance. All high-performing organizations are very deliberate and focused on their culture. The greater complexity that you're dealing with, the more difficult it is to achieve and sustain the levels of performance that we're talking about. To truly get results that are sustainable, you have to take the multifaceted approach. You have to look at both the human side as well as those 4 organizational elements as well. Your H&OP journey has to be custom fit. What worked in one organization will not work in another. The concepts are the same, but the specifics really matter. And so that's why that prepare phase is so important, to understand really where the organization is to get going today. And then choosing that starting point has so much of an impact on how effective you're able to be in this transformation. So with that, we've got a few minutes left. I'll pause there. And first, thank you for your time. My contact information is on the slide. But at this, I'd love to have questions from the audience.
So what are some of the factors that you use from selling it to the leadership, that here are the type of benefits you're going to get? Is it financially? Is it less missed time? Are there certain key areas that you see company to company? Yeah, and so one of the common starting points is, hey, around safety performance or around, say, productivity. And folks will say, hey, I really want to improve this. And our kind of response is, that sounds great, and we'll likely be able to show tremendous results there, but they won't be confined to, say, your productivity or your safety performance. And so there's a lot of different areas. So overall profitability of the organization, your ability to train, attract, and retain talent. When you have an organization that's effectively executing these principles, what you find is that folks come to work, they're highly engaged, and that they are in a very highly rewarding and fulfilling work environment where they feel like that they are contributing and they understand exactly how their contributions result in the day's operations being successful. You see lower scrap rates, you see less waste, you see fewer environmental issues and safety-related fines in companies that are doing this well. You also see lower overhead costs. We've done studies that showed that companies that are effectively focused on this, say in the oil and gas industry, they might have SG&A costs of around 4 to 6% of revenue. But on the folks that are not focused on these sort of programs, they're running somewhere between 12 to 24% of revenue. So a significant improvement in overhead costs as well.
Might be along the same lines of buy-in. How do you make this not just another project, but weave it into the culture?
So,
and let me maybe expand. There is, especially if you're in a complex, multinational, global organization, there's something coming down, I'm making this up, from corporate, right? Yep. And now we are all becoming H&OP, right? And how is that going to translate then to a single site in a different geography, and how do you, as I said, make it not just the flavor of the month, but make it sustainable and weave it into the organizational culture? Right,
and I think that gets down to choosing the starting point. An example, a current multinational manufacturer we're working with, we've actually started in their quality department, and we have focused on installing those tenets of high-performing organizations into their culture and imbuing that into the way the quality department is working. And that's a global operations, but we're focused on the quality piece.
That has now got traction on the operational side, the safety side, and now you have those functional leaders seeing the results that and the different ways that the quality team is working, and that has turned it into something that now the rest of the organization is pulling from. And so it really comes back to defining that starting point and anchoring on something that you're going to be able to show results quickly and make them meaningful to the rest of the organization. Great. Thank you very much for your time today, and we look forward to having the chance to talk with you again soon.